In the spring of 1999, a hiker stumbled upon a plastic bag deep in the woods outside Atlanta, Georgia. Inside was something straight out of a nightmare. A human head, soaked in bleach, wrapped in tape and left to decay. Within days, more bags were discovered. Arms, legs, bones, a body hacked into pieces, scattered in the forest as if the killer believed no one would ever find the truth. Investigators rushed to the scene, horrified by the brutality. The bleach, the dismemberment, these weren't the actions of someone panicking. This was methodical, calculated, cold. At first, detectives believed the remains belonged to a missing man. That theory stuck for years. But when DNA testing advanced, the truth came to light. The body was not a man's at all. It belonged to a young mother who had been missing since Christmas of the previous year. Her name was Melissa Wolfenbarger. She was just 21 years old. A daughter, a sister, a mother of two, and someone had wanted her erased from existence. Melissa's family had been searching desperately. They called, they wrote letters, they drove hours to Atlanta, clinging to hope. But what they found instead was chilling. Her house was empty. No furniture, no toys, no sign of life. Melissa, her husband Christopher, and their children were gone without a trace. When confronted, Christopher's story was simple. Melissa had left him. She had walked away, abandoned her children, and wanted nothing to do with her old life. But Melissa's family didn't believe him. They knew her. They knew she loved her children more than anything, and they were certain she would never leave them. Yet Christopher never reported her missing. He never searched for her. He never begged her to come home. And now the police had a body, a dismembered corpse in the woods. And while the investigation pointed to Melissa's husband, no one could have imagined that this case would eventually stretch into her own bloodline. Revealing that her father was hiding a secret so sinister, it would shock everyone who learned it. Before Melissa's name was ever tied to a murder investigation, she was a young woman trying to build a future. At just 21, she was raising two children, balancing motherhood with the challenges of a rocky marriage. Her husband, Christopher, was controlling. Friends and family recalled arguments, bruises that Melissa tried to explain away, and a young mother whose spirit seemed to dim with every passing year. She had been bright, hopeful, full of laughter. But behind closed doors, things were different. Those closest to Melissa began to notice the warning signs. She confided to her mother that Christopher could be violent, that he lost his temper easily, and that she didn't always feel safe. But like so many women in abusive relationships, Melissa stayed. She told herself things might get better, that she had to hold on for her children. By Christmas of 1998, though, cracks in the marriage were undeniable. Melissa had promised her mother she would come home for the holiday. She had even requested a special gift, a photograph of her late grandfather, something she deeply cherished. It was supposed to be a joyful reunion, but Melissa never showed up. Her mother waited. She called. She prayed. And when days passed with no word, the fear set in. Melissa loved her children too much to simply vanish. When her parents drove to Atlanta, their worst suspicions grew stronger. The home Melissa shared with Christopher was empty, stripped bare, as if the life that once existed inside had been erased overnight. Furniture gone, children's toys gone, Melissa gone. Christopher's explanation? She had left him, just walked out. According to him, Melissa had abandoned her kids, abandoned her family, and disappeared into the night. But Melissa's family didn't buy it for a second. She wasn't the type to give up on her children. If she left, something was terribly wrong. And when investigators began looking closer at Christopher's behavior, the red flags multiplied. He hadn't filed a missing persons report. He hadn't organized a search. He hadn't even seemed worried. Instead, he carried on as if nothing had happened, while Melissa's family was left desperately searching for answers. For months after Melissa's disappearance, her family begged police to take action. But without an official missing persons report from Christopher, the case stalled. Melissa was simply gone. No one knew if she had left voluntarily, or if something much darker had happened. Her parents refused to accept silence. They called every lead, knocked on every door, and never stopped demanding answers. But Christopher, the man who should have been most desperate to find her, showed no urgency, no emotion, no fight. And then came the discovery. In the spring of 1999, a hiker stumbled across a plastic bag in the woods outside Atlanta. Inside was a human head, wrapped in tape, bleached and partially decomposed. Investigators rushed to the scene, horrified at the level of cruelty. Within days, more bags appeared. Each one carried another piece of the victim. Arms, legs, bones. Whoever had done this hadn't just killed their victim. They had erased her, piece by piece, from the world. At the time, investigators believed the remains belonged to a missing man. The evidence seemed to point that way, and so the case went cold, with the true victim still hidden in plain sight. Melissa's family remained trapped in limbo. They were grieving, but they had no body, no proof, no closure, and all the while, Christopher stuck to his story. Melissa had walked away. It would take years and advances in DNA technology before the truth emerged. The body in the bags wasn't a man at all. It was Melissa, the young mother who was supposed to come home for Christmas, the daughter who never made it, the sister her family never stopped searching for. The horrifying discovery proved what her family had known all along. Melissa had never abandoned her children. She hadn't run away. She had been murdered. And now the question became clear. Who was responsible for turning a young mother into a collection of bags scattered in the woods? All eyes turned back to Christopher. But investigators were about to uncover a twist that made this case far more sinister than a simple domestic murder. When investigators confirmed that the dismembered remains were Melissa's, suspicion immediately turned to the man closest to her, her husband, Christopher. From the start, his behavior didn't fit. He never filed a missing persons report. He never organized a search. He never begged for his wife's safe return. Instead, he told anyone who asked that Melissa had abandoned him, and even more unthinkably, abandoned her children. To police, this explanation fell apart instantly. Melissa's family insisted she lived for her kids. She would never leave them behind. And yet, without hard evidence linking Christopher to the gruesome bags in the woods, investigators couldn't make an arrest. They had motive, they had suspicion, but they needed proof. Years passed. Melissa's children grew up without their mother. Her family clung to the hope that one day, the truth would come out. And then, in a twist no one could have anticipated, another name surfaced in connection to Melissa's case. Not Christopher, but Melissa's own father. Decades after Melissa's disappearance, investigators discovered that her father, Carl Patton, carried a dark, hidden past. He wasn't just a man with secrets. He was a convicted murderer and a serial killer. Court records revealed that Carl had brutally killed before, and he was capable of unspeakable violence. Suddenly, the Wolfenbarger family faced an unthinkable possibility. Melissa's death might not have been at the hands of her husband at all, but tied to the blood running through her own family tree. The suspicion that had hovered over Christopher for years now collided with the horrifying reality of Melissa's father's past. And the case, already chilling, grew even more disturbing. Had Melissa been a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her husband? Or had she fallen prey to the same murderous impulses that had already haunted her family for years through her father? The truth was murky, the evidence incomplete. But one thing was certain. Melissa had never simply walked away. Someone had silenced her. And as investigators dug deeper, the web of lies, abuse, and secrets would only grow more tangled. Melissa's story is one of those cases that lingers, not just because of the brutality of her death, but because of the haunting shadows it leaves behind. For years, the simplest question, what happened to her, went unanswered. Even after her remains were identified, there was no clear closure. Instead, the case only spawned more questions. Did Christopher kill her, using that stolen saw to destroy her body and erase the evidence? His history of violence, his shifting stories, and his cold detachment all point in that direction. But then there's Melissa's father, a man capable of 5 separate murders, confessions dripping with blood and guilt. Could his daughter have become another hidden victim of his violence? Or was he telling the truth when he swore he'd never hurt her? The tragedy of Melissa's story is that she was trapped between two men, a husband who abused her and a father whose crimes stretched far beyond comprehension. And somewhere between their lies, her life was cut short. For Melissa's mother and sister, the pain never faded. They spent years fighting to keep her memory alive, pushing investigators not to forget her name. They refused to let her disappear into silence. And when crime analyst Cheryl McCullum took up Melissa's story decades later, launching her podcast and breathing new life into the cold case, the fight for justice found a new voice. Her work led to the discovery of new witnesses, fresh attention, renewed investigations, and finally, in 2024, more than 25 years after Melissa vanished, Christopher was arrested. Investigators have not revealed all the evidence they uncovered. Perhaps they're holding it back for trial. Perhaps they're protecting the fragile threads that finally tied this case together. But what matters is this. Melissa's story is closer to resolution than ever before. Her children, now adults, believe their father is guilty. They've carried the weight of this case their entire lives, growing up under the shadow of unanswered questions. Now, they want what Melissa's mother has wanted from the very beginning, justice. But even as the trial approaches, the case remains bigger than just a verdict. It's a reminder of how fragile life can be, how easily abuse hides behind closed doors, and how silence can last decades if voices aren't raised. Melissa's story isn't just about murder. It's about resilience, a mother's relentless fight, a sister's unshakable love, a community's refusal to let her fade away. And now it's about us, keeping her name alive, making sure her story is heard. Because Melissa's voice was stolen, but together we can make sure her truth never is. So what do you think? Was it Christopher all along? Was her father's dark past more connected than he admitted? Or is there still another layer to this story waiting to surface? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe stories like Melissa's deserve to be told, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who cares about true crime, and subscribe for more cases just like this one. Because Melissa Wolfenbarger's story isn't just a mystery, it's a warning, it's a tragedy, and above all, it's a fight for justice that took nearly 26 years to reach the light.